I get discouraged for sure, and I will quit fighting at some point. And that point is when the first shovel of dirt hits the top of my box 6 feet down.
Hello and welcome to COS Indiana Live as we bring you Roundtable. The Roundtable segment is presented here every fourth Monday of the month at 7 p.m. We'll be focusing on education and discussion of the topics and challenges we all face as we use the Constitution to save the Constitution. Join us now as we bring you COS Indiana Roundtable with our MC, John Ackerman.
Welcome to COS Indiana Roundtable. I'm your host, John Ackerman. This is broadcast number 195 of COS Indiana Live. This month's topic is term limits, so let's get right to it. I'm going to bring the Roundtable panel on right now. First, Ken Kashuba, our State Communications Coordinator. Welcome back, Ken.
Thank you, John. Good to see you.
And Dale Parrish, who's a member of our comms team and our former state director. Welcome, Dale.
Hello, John.
And our new state director, Dale Tipton. Congratulations and welcome to your first roundtable as director.
Thank you, John.
And Brandon Garrett, you've been here before. Welcome back, Brandon.
Howdy, John.
And the icing on the cake is Cheryl Shopmeyer. Welcome, Cheryl. You were here one other time, weren't you?
I was, yes. Thank you for inviting me again.
Well, we're glad you could come. Just so our viewers know, tell us what your connection is to Convention of States and where in the state you live.
Okay, well, I am a region captain, Region 7, and I'm in the west central area of Indiana.
Okay. That gives us a place to hang our hats on. Thank you. Glad you could be here tonight. So our first question on term limits is this. Why does Convention of States want term limits? Cheryl, you want to take first crack at that?
Well, I mean, I've read a lot of things that Convention of States believes, but I don't get anything specific. But for me, I think they want term limits because the states deserve the power being returned to them instead of the federal government making all these decisions. The federal government only exists because the states say so. So I just think it's part of that process to get that return to the states.
Yeah, and it was the states who created the federal government, not the other way around.
Right.
Okay, anyone else on the round table want to take a crack at that? Why does COS want term limits? Dale Parrish.
Yeah, I think we'll probably get into this more a little later on, John. But I think one of the objectives of term limits is to get to the deep state and to get to those federal officials. Like I said, I'm sure we're gonna be talking about this more. But to get at those deep state individuals that are unelected autocrats in our government. And I think that's one of the objectives of COS.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Ken, what you got for us?
Well, I don't think the original intent of the founders was to have people in our government hang around for 50 or 60 years. Just that simple.
Yeah, I think they really believe that we would have citizen legislators who would serve a term or two and then go back to their farm or their shop or whatever their profession was before they were elected to the House and or the Senate. Okay, Dale Tipton.
Just thinking about the congressional part of that, Congress has been basically gridlocked now for a number of years and not really accomplishing much of anything. And I think the guys that have been there guys and gals that have been there for years and years and years are a big part of that problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Brandon, do you want to kick in anything on this question before we move ahead?
Well, I mean, everyone really covered it. And Dale even kind of alluded to something I know we're going to get into, and that's really kind of a juicy topic. But I mean, at the end of the day, like the way DC is and as it stands today is, arguably irreparably broken. And part of that has been, the professionalization of being a career public official, whether you're elected or unelected. Although there's a lot of literature out there that the founders were supportive of tenured experience in DC, they really kind of frowned on it in terms of it being this lifelong aspiration of your career, because that leads to what we see today with, tyrannical rule and kind of despotism. They very much talked about limiting someone's propensity to go after money or power, which is why for the longest time, Congress wasn't even paid. Maybe we should go back to that.
If we went back to that, we wouldn't need term limits. Everybody would self-limit. Let me get back to where I can make some money. Yeah, I like that idea. Okay, by the way, if you have a question or comment about term limits, you can post it right now if you're watching live on Facebook or YouTube. Just click the comment button and enter your comment or question. And Ken Kashuba is going to keep an eye on that. And as much as possible, he's going to bring your comments and questions into the live stream. So let me move on to my second question. Whose terms should be limited? There's lots of people who work for the federal government. So Cheryl, let's start with you. Who exactly are we talking about here whose terms ought to be limited?
Well, I think we focus on Congress, and we know that they're not going to limit themselves. So that's why we need the convention of states called. But I think it should include everyone that's involved in the federal government, not your regular employees. I mean, they aren't the ones making the decisions, but anyone that's in a decision-making role probably should have a term limit.
Okay, so you mean not just elected officials, but
right, the bureaucrats, of course, some of the bureaucrats would be eliminated if we would take care of that by eliminating some of these departments that are unnecessary.
Okay, that's a horse of a different color. But,
yes, it is.
Convention of States really is after three kinds of amendments to the Constitution. One of them is term limits. Another one is limiting the size and scope and reach of the federal government. And that's where eliminating some departments could come into play. And the third, just to refresh our viewers' memories, the third kind of amendment that we'd like to see to the Constitution is fiscal restraint. So there are three things we're after. And tonight, what we're really talking about is the term limits. So Dale, do you have an answer to that question?
Well, I think we should be aware that our resolution does call for term limits on all federal officials.
Yeah.
And that would include the judiciary,
okay,
which would include Supreme Court judges, and all actually all federal judges. So and we'll be, I'm sure we'll be talking about this a little more later on. But I know that's kind of a new thing to consider, since Supreme Court judges typically are appointed for life.
Right.
This pillar of our resolution does include Supreme Court judges.
All federal officials. Ken, what do you have for us?
We have a couple of questions coming in, John. We'll go ahead and bring them up now so we can answer them on the.
Yeah, let's go over there.
We have Charlie Corneau saying, "Do you think those past term limits should be allowed in advisory positions?"
Those individuals who are past their term in advisory positions. Interesting thought. Somebody want to take a crack at that one? Cheryl? You were just bringing your hand up to your chin, right?
Well, it just made me think, but he's got a good point, because a lot of times that's what happens. They'll go into a different role after they've served, and that's a key word, I think, is served. And that's not what a lot of these people are doing.
Yeah.
But they will go into an advisory role and start influencing the ones that replace them. So I don't know about that.
That's there's a lot of pluses and minuses to think about with that.
Yes.
The thing I would want to avoid is letting them become lobbyists. Because that's where undue influence can come from, because they can buy votes on the floor of the House or the Senate, and we don't want to see that happen. But advisory positions, Charlie, thank you for that question. Anyone else want to answer it before we move on? Maybe not. Ken, what else do you have for us?
Got one more. This one kind of is we'll throw it up anyway. Why does congressional leadership rule over the rest of the members? Is it because of campaign contributions? So it kind of falls in line with what you're talking about there.
Yeah. Okay. Who wants to try that? And a great silence arose from the group.
Yeah, that
Brandon.
comes down to, I think, just old-fashioned. We'll use the polite term at first, seniority, right? When you've got the most tenured, what we would refer to as entrenched members in the organization, like they're going to have spent decades, because the average congressional term is well over 20 years now. They rise to those positions in leadership by virtue of, hey, you've been here forever. You are the advisor. You are the go-to person. So it's really just kind of the inherent flaw in the system of allowing these consecutive terms after term after term. Campaign contributions obviously play a part in that, because with an 85, I think, % reelection rate on incumbents in the House and like 90 in the Senate since the Obama administration, you can't run against these people and win. The data is out there, is very clear on that. But I think it's just the natural nepotism of an entrenched organization is really what it comes down to.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. Dale, did you have a comment?
Well, I would just add that the way things are set up, it's really run, more like a union, runs its shop, and this type of a procedure where the leadership has all of this power, it kind of provides cover for the rest of the folks, because they can basically kind of defer decisions on voting of things that are really important and say, well, this chairman or that chairman wouldn't bring it to the floor or whatever. And it gives them a way to kind of dodge their own responsibility to their constituents.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dale Parrish.
I think this question relates to something we are trying to get changed in the Indiana state legislature with regard to rules.
Yeah.
Yes.
And trying to get those rules, first of all, make everyone aware of what these rules are, because actually one or two people can make a lot of decisions over the legislature that can kill bills and prevent things from being debated or even introduced. And I think the same thing happens at the federal level, and we saw that when the Republicans took over the House in this past election. If you recall some of the problems that they had with regard to electing a Speaker of the House and some of the demands that were being made at that time, I think that has to do with the rules that are in place, and they need to be changed. So I don't think it's campaign contributions. I think it's rules that have been in place for decades that need to be changed.
Okay, Ken, what else do you have?
Well, we have an active chat room this evening, so I'm going to just throw up a couple of comments, whether we actually have to address them or not, but want to go ahead and put them up to show you what we've got coming in on the chat board. First, I do want to bring in one of our vacationing members who's back, and it's good to see Gary Harbaugh back. But Gary says leaders were not intended to have so much power, he believes. So just wanted to throw that in there. And then I think one of the ones that kind of hits is our friend Robert. Robert says, I seriously think cutting the salaries down to the $100 a day, this could be a starting point, and see how well this takes care of the problem of career politicians.
I like that. Follow the money. And if the money's not there, they won't be grazing so much.
And then Charlie followed that up with, well, let me see. No, that was Brandon. I'm sorry, that moved on me here. Charlie says, don't show up to work, don't get paid.
Exactly.
So we've had a couple of good comments there, but go ahead and move on, John. I think that covers us for now. Okay.
Well, I think, I did want to say before I leave that question, whose term should be limited, the favorite suggestion that I've seen regarding the Supreme Court is, of course, this would take a constitutional amendment, because right now the Constitution says the members of the Supreme Court shall serve for good service, and as long as they are rendering what's judged to be good service, they can serve as long as they're alive. But I've seen one suggestion that a member of the Supreme Court be limited to one term of 18 years, and barring anybody dying prematurely or resigning for some other reason, that would give each president an appointment every 2 years. So when a president gets elected for 4 years, you know that he or she would have 2 appointments to the Supreme Court, one in 2 years and another one in 4 years. And it would give some regularity to it. Now, that's just a thought that I wanted to throw out there, because it's the favorite idea that I've seen about term limits for Supreme Court, one term of 18 years. And, I think really that's enough. I don't think the founders ever intended lifetime tenure, Okay, Dale, did you have a response to that?
I did some research on this years ago when I was giving town hall meetings, and the research that I came across at that time, and like I said, this has been a few years ago, but the number that kept coming up was 12 years. 12. Yeah, is the number I saw. And I did see some 16, the number 16 come up once in a while, and occasionally 18, but 12 years seemed to come up frequently in the research that I did. So I don't know.
Okay. Well, it's all up in the air, because until we get 34 states to pass that resolution, then we'll have the convention, and then it'll be up to the delegates at the convention, and then it'll be up to the states to ratify any proposed amendments. So let's move on to the next question, and it has to do with benefits. I just would like the panel to kick this question around a little bit. What are the benefits of term limits? What are the good things about them? And again, I'm going to go back to Cheryl as our special guest. You want to take first swing at this pitch?
Sure. Well, I think it's what we've been talking about. It kind of eliminates those career politicians so that they can't stay forever and ever and ever. And I also think it might help reduce the power of the lobbyists because they won't have people that they can, just sit on forever and ever as well. So I think it's kind of a win-win situation, in my opinion.
I'm thinking about the poor lobbyist. If a representative is limited to, let's say, 2 terms, that would be 4 years, right? Two 2-year terms. And these lobbyists would have to be chasing brand new representatives and building relationships. And it's going to take them a year or 2 to build that relationship. And then after 4 years, it's going to change, and their life would become chaotic, and I would love it. Dale Tipton.
Well, just to kind of follow up with Cheryl's line of thought, from what I have read whenever I was researching this, the thought is that whenever you first come to Congress or to the Senate, whatever, that you're not in the pocket of any lobbyist or special interest group. And whenever you get there, especially as somebody that's new, you're kind of resistant to somebody putting pressure on you to make you have a certain opinion or to change your mind on things. And so this really buys some time where that person can be in office and truly represent his constituents instead of those organizations or lobbyists that are putting pressure on him.
Agreed.
Okay. Anyone else want to kick in on this one? Some benefits of term limits?
Well, I think one of the other ones, and it's just the kind of the reality of human biology. Like as we age, we're not necessarily, not to bring President Biden into the conversation or anything like that, but not all, we don't all age as gracefully, especially when it comes to our mental acuity. But at a fundamental level, like the programming that someone receives when they're young, because when we're young, up to the age of about 10 or 13, our brain is operating in a certain wavelength where it's basically like a blank CD and it's being programmed. And we know this from neuroscience and behavior studies. So the programming that someone that was born in the 30s or the 40s or the 50s that they received and the fundamental belief system and values that they have and they hold and how that impacts how they act are significantly different than someone, say, that's in their 40s or their 50s that was born in the 80s or 90s. And as those members in Congress are entrenched year after year after year, living basically in DC because the legislature is practically full time, they're further and further and further removed from even listening to their constituents, let alone being cognitively available to new and open and fresh ideas. So having that rotation would circumvent that entirely and allow us to really have the House, especially because of the number of representatives, be truly representative of what the people want. The founders intended that the legislative branch of the government was to be the most powerful body, and we don't have that anymore. It's arguably probably the most impotent of the three.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the Congress has ceded much of its power to the executive branch, because when they write laws now, they'll say, the regulations required by this law will be determined by the appropriate office in the executive branch. And so we've got this huge and ever-growing executive branch, and there's so much power there, and then there's so much power in the Supreme Court. But I do think with some constitutional conservatives on the Supreme Court, we're starting to see that aspect turn around. But I'd like to see Congress reassert its authority and write the whole law rather than just cede power to the executive branch. Okay, Ken, what do you have?
Yeah, I just want to throw something up, a comment from Charlie again, kind of tagging on to what Brandon was talking about. And that's in regards to age. And I know this, obviously is something that has been talked about in other realms, but he's talking about a thought that he's showing up that federal politicians should be required to show both physical and mental ability to do their jobs effectively once reaching the age of 75. So he wanted to know how that figured in. I mean, obviously, at this point, if we get a constitution, obviously the term limits brought up in Convention of States, this wouldn't be part of it because it's kind of a separate element, I think. But just wanted to see what people thought about this as far as the mental and the physical abilities to be studied.
Well, if you think about it, what job is out there that you don't have age limits? My daughter has to retire from the prison at 57. So, and that's pretty young in comparison to politicians. So, I mean, that should be considered not for our purposes, but at some point in time.
Mm-hmm. If you're thinking about federal officials being public servants, once you're no longer fit to serve physically or mentally, maybe you should take a back seat. Yeah.
Well, they do the same thing to pilots, right? I mean, there's a limit on an age and when you can fly a jet airliner.
Yep. Well, Charlie, thank you for that. Okay, Dale, what do you have?
Well, just to kind of carry on in that thought, whenever we think of term limits, we normally think of, just how many consecutive terms or whatever that you can serve and what those years would be. But there's also term limits that can be based upon age. That's another way of doing it and accomplishing the same thing. Or you could also have term limits that required you to have no more than 2 consecutive terms before you have to get out, and then you can run again after your period of 2, 4 years, 6 years, whatever has expanded. That would allow you to jump back in. So there's all kinds of different variations that can be put on that.
Yeah, and we're going to come back around and talk about that in a few minutes. So That's a good precursor. Thank you, Dale. Dale Parrish, what do you have?
I just wanted to tell you, I'm getting a little uncomfortable about this age of 75, and you guys are, talking about that.
No kidding.
I don't
You're
know.
59 and holding, Dale. You're okay. You're good.
Well, I don't know. I'd also say, who's going to develop the test, the mental and physical test? Who's going to develop that? Who's going to interpret that? Does every new administration come up with a new test? And
those are all good questions.
And the saying now, 80 is the what 70 used to be. Today's 80 is what 70 used to be, type of thing. So,
well, for many things, but maybe not for national leadership. I think there needs to be a high bar there somewhere. Dale Tipton, your hand was up.
I've got a list of names here. I just wanted to run past everybody and for the viewers. John Dingell, Robert Byrd, Carl Hayden, Daniel Inouye, Jamie Whitten, John Conyers, Carl Vinson. These are all guys that have served, and all of them have served over 50 years.
I think wasn't Byrd over 90 years old when he.
I think so.
Yeah.
Him and Strom Thurmond. I think Thurmond served up to he was right at 100, I believe.
Yeah. I know he was the oldest one for a long time.
Okay, well, that reminds me, another benefit of term limits would be it gives these folks a chance to retire and enjoy life a little bit, and they haven't had that opportunity.
I don't know. I think some of them are enjoying their time there a lot.
Yeah, too much.
Yeah,
Power
much.
has its trappings. Yep.
Yes,
okay, well, we're going to take a little break now, and there's some guy named John who's done some journals, and I think we're going to see one of his videos now.
Yeah, it's a young guy, young John. Yeah,
very young.
Don't go away, everybody. Stay there.
John Ackerman for Convention of States, Indiana. Somebody said, it's not over when you lose, it's over when you quit. I'm a big Star Trek fan, okay? I haven't talked about Star Trek in these journals yet, but big fan. From the very first time that the Starship Enterprise flew across my TV screen in 1966. Been a fan of Star Trek. And in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Worf was a prisoner on a foreign planet, and he was put in a death match with somebody, and he kept coming back. He kept getting defeated, but he would not quit. He would stand up to fight again. And finally his opponent said, I cannot defeat that Klingon. The only thing I can do is kill him. You know what? It's not over when you lose. It's not over when you're defeated. It's over when you quit. Don't be a quitter. We here in the Convention of States are not going to quit. We are more than halfway towards having the 34 states needed to see the convention happen. And we lose a state here and there. We lose one house of a state general assembly. We lose a committee battle here and there, but we don't quit. And it's not over, 'cause we ain't quitting. Who was that young fella? Well, that ties into the little clip we saw of Mark Meckler, our national president, at the very beginning of this roundtable. He said he's going to quit when the first shovel of dirt hits his casket 6 feet down. And we're going to see that complete video at the end today. So let's move on to our next question, and that has to do with objections. There are some people who object to term limits. So what are some of the objections? And Cheryl, You're up first.
Okay. Well, some people say, well, we have elections. That should serve as a term limit. If they're not doing a good job, they'll get voted out. But sadly, that's not what happens. But there's also the other side of the coin, that the good people that you really appreciate, and they're actually there fighting for the right things and the right reasons, have to go too. So I don't know, kind of a double-edged sword there.
Okay.
With that one.
Thanks for getting us started. Someone else with another objection. What have you heard? What have you read? Why do people object to term limits?
I'll kind of jump in off of Cheryl's initial one. I mean, I've heard conversations, and the argument is valid that, essentially at its core, it's undemocratic. Like Cheryl's alluding to, like, hey, if they're in office, they're doing a good job, that like what their people want them to do, like that shouldn't preclude them or exclude them from being able to serve again and again and again. And while I see that argument, the reverse of that is also true. That cuts both ways by virtue of the fact that the re-election rate of incumbents is, north of 80%. Not having a diverse pool to vote and select from, I would contend, is arguably just as undemocratic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll go to Dale Tipton before I say what was on my mind. Go ahead, Dale.
Well, another thing that I heard was, you have people in the legislature that become policy experts on a given subject, that they're the go-to person on energy or, whatever the thing may be, monetary policy, etc. And the argument is it takes years upon years upon years to gather that expertise to be able to make the kind of decisions that are needed. So, and it all falls back into that experience argument, I guess.
Okay. I was going to make a comment about one of our Indiana senators, Mike Braun. I know Mike. I met him when he was running in the primary against two members of the House of Representatives. And he told me at that time, and he stuck to his word, that he had signed a term limits pledge, and he was going to serve no more than 2 terms as senator from Indiana. And everybody knows now that he's going to serve only 1 term. Now, I think he's been a heck of a good senator. And on the one hand, I would like to see him stay in there as a senator, but he feels like he can make a greater contribution in the governor's office, and Convention of States doesn't get involved in politics. And so I'm not going to say anything about who anybody should vote for governor, but he has thrown his hat into the governor's ring, opening that 1 seat for the Senate. And it'll be interesting to see what happens next year, who runs for that and who wins the nomination. But anyway, I hold one of our senators, Mike Braun, up as an example of somebody who did not object and does not object to term limits, and he's living it out in his own life. And if he loses the race for governor, he'll be done with public service. He'll go back and enjoy his retirement in, I think, Jasper, Indiana. I think that's where he's from. Well, anyone else want to raise some of the objections that people have to term limits? Or is this an empty well and we're going to move on to something else? Okay, let's go on to the next question. And Dale Tipton alluded to this a few minutes ago. Different kinds of limits that we might put on terms. And so, Dale, since you brought it up, I want to circle back to you and ask you to say some more about the different kinds of term limits that we might impose on federal officials.
Well, I mean, it's like we were talking about before, and Cheryl mentioned, was it a daughter that had to leave government service at age 57?
Yeah.
That was my personal experience as well. I was in government service, and it was mandatory for me to be out by then. That's 57 years old. You wouldn't think, for a lot of people, I don't even know if an airline pilot has to retire that young. I'm not exactly sure, but I mean, age is a thing that you don't normally think about as being associated with term limits, but it is if you set the rule, it's very effective whenever people know they come in at whatever age, and when they reach a certain age, they have to go. So I think that's something that should be considered whenever the whole idea of term limits is discussed.
Okay, so we could look at the age as one kind of term limit. Now, Cheryl, I didn't intend to slight you. I just wanted to go back to Dale since he brought it up in the first place. Cheryl, you have any other
No, it's
ideas
fine.
about what kinds of term limits?
Well, I've talked to different people about that. I don't know what the right answer is, but I do think that perhaps, maybe 4 terms in the House and 2 terms in the Senate is plenty. And then if they want to get back in later, they could, I guess, unless they don't meet the age requirement, which hopefully that might play a factor too. Like I said, there's not a job out there that doesn't say you have to retire by this age. At least I don't know of any, except for government.
Okay. Dale Parrish.
I can't recall if we touched on this or not, but would it be possible, do you think, that not only limit the term of office, but also limit the involvement post-term? In other words, would at the end of the term, would they be allowed to be in an advisory role or some other type of role? Maybe could be some other limitations on that too.
I think there could be. I'm not a lawyer, but I've seen Perry Mason on TV, so maybe I'm qualified. I think that an amendment to the Constitution could very well spell that out.
Yeah.
It is, after all, the Constitution, and of course, it would have to be ratified by, is it 36 states?
38.
Yeah,
38.
38. I knew I was in the ballpark, but my math is a little rusty tonight. 38 states would have to ratify such an amendment. But once they do, it's the law of the land.
I think there would be a better chance, though, of the term limits themselves being passed than a term limit with an age requirement. That's just a lot of factors moving around.
Yeah. A simpler amendment probably would have a better chance of being ratified in 38 state houses. Yeah. Okay. Any other ideas on the kinds of term limits that we might be able to impose? Brandon, you going to talk?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's certainly any number of variations that we can kind of explore, right? And that's one of the whole premises of having the convention called, is to go through the nuts and bolts of what does this actually look like in practical terms. And that's one thing I think we would all agree, and our audience included, that these policy experts that Dale kind of alluded to don't necessarily think about the downstream unintended consequences of, hey, when the rubber meets the road, how does this actually play out? Like, everything always works in a vacuum. Everything always works in a laboratory, right? But I think if we can learn anything from the unscheduled sudden disassembly of SpaceX rocket this past week, like, when things happen, like, they're going to happen how they're supposed to, and we don't plan for that. So when we kind of look through this conversation on this topic, especially when we kind of go down the rabbit hole of where Dale kind of talked about with the alphabet agencies and the bureaucratic state who are all policy experts, right? Like, what does that really look like in practical terms? And maybe the way that we need to look at it isn't necessarily strictly just on a number basis. Maybe the number is the byproduct of, hey, this type of limitation is going to provide this result, and this is the most agreeable or the most desirable or has the least amount of undesirable effects. So we should go with this one, and the number just happens to be what it is.
Okay, Ken.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up a comment that kind of leads into. And before I bring it on, I'll just say, I think we've had 2 or 3 years now to see the so-called experts handle our country. So I do want to go ahead and show you a comment that our friend Robert had here. And he said the founders didn't have much experience and they may not have been policy experts. God save us from the experts. So I thought that some people.
Thank you, Robert. I like that.
Well, and he's not wrong. I mean, there's a great documentary that I'll plug. And when I go back later tonight, I'll drop the link the YouTube link in the comments of everywhere where this is posted, or people can just search for it. But the Pacific Legal Foundation put together a great documentary called Trust Us. It's about 45 minutes long, and it really kind of traces the rise of the American expert bureaucracy behind the scenes, starting from the Industrial Revolution in today. So when you look at it from that context of, hey, that's when we started implementing all of these experts in this particular field for this particular advisory role, we've seen what that has grown into, right? Mm-hmm. And we definitely needed some way to kind of cut the weeds back from that, so to speak. But definitely check that out. It's available on YouTube.
Thanks, Brandon. Ken?
I see Dale has a hand up, but just a couple of comments that I think that follow up on this. So we'll go ahead and put these up as some food for thought. But Charlie says, better to get some of your goals met than to push details and get nothing. That was just a comment on what we were talking about as far as adding on to some of these things that we'd like to see. But then our friend Gary Harbaugh, he has an interesting comment. So we're going to go ahead and put that up. He says, how about increasing the minimum age? Now reps must be 25, maybe 45 for the House and 55 for the Senate and President. There's an interesting thought.
Now that people live longer, we could have a higher age. Yeah, you got to think about 1787 when they wrote the Constitution. What was life expectancy? So interesting thought, Gary. Interesting thought. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next question, and it's really the final question in our conversation. Looking down the road, envisioning possible futures, what would happen if we limited terms, not only of the legislature, but of the judiciary? We have a term limit for the president. What about the other two branches of government? What would happen? What big changes would we see in our country? And Cheryl, you're up first.
Oh, wow. Well, I think it's a lot of the things that we've been talking about. We don't have people that are entrenched. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. And the other side of that is, if you keep doing the same things over and over again and expect different results, well, that's just insanity. Mm-hmm. So I think there would be great changes, and it would promote more people to serve in a capacity that actually is helpful instead of harmful.
Okay. Good insights. Dale Tipton.
Just something I think on the perhaps positive side, and this has kind of troubled me a lot, and I didn't really observe it until President Trump's administration. But if you've got a man that runs for president and he tells you what he'd like to do, and he lays out his foreign policy, for example, and all of those kind of things. Let's just look at foreign policy. Then that foreign policy is basically enacted through his Department of State. And so if you have people in there that go, you know what, I just don't really like that idea. I don't care if you are president. I've been around here for 30 years or whatever, and I don't think that works. And so if you had the ability to limit the tenure of some of those kind of people that are in these various agencies or departments, it could really bring that institution in line with what the chief executive would like to see. And it just seems like the country would run a whole lot smoother.
Yeah. And when we, the people, vote for a president, we want to see his or her agenda implemented. And the deep state has been working against certain presidents to keep them from succeeding. Good point, Dale. Good point. The other Dale.
I don't have an answer to this question, but I'm just thinking, we're talking about limiting terms here. We're talking about getting to the deep state. And I think we do need to understand that there are some very, very good people in the deep state. Some very good federal employees doing a great job. If we're limiting terms on many of these positions, might we be might good qualified people no longer pursue those jobs?
That's a possibility, I suppose.
Could we be running the risk of having a less qualified, less staff in the federal government. I'm just like I said, I don't have an answer to that, but just a thought. Just a thought.
Okay. My initial response to that is, surely in a nation of 330 million people, there are some good folks out there who can take some of these positions. And, same thing might be said of airline pilots and people who work in the prisons. When they get to a certain age, they have to retire, and then younger people get a chance. So it could go either way. Who knows?
Yeah.
Wish I had a crystal ball. Wish I could tell. Ken, is there anything else from the viewing audience?
Well, an interesting comment that I think I need to put up, because it really throws some focus back on the overview of where we are in our country. And I know we're talking about term limits for our government and things that we're talking about here, but our friend Robert brought up a really interesting comment. I want to go ahead and just throw this up there. We would then have to face the possibility that the real problem is not them, but maybe it really is us, the people. Time to face the possibility that the people are the ones that need to get back to our roots. And I think we've got a problem on that side as well. And that I think, that just to expand on my thought on that is, I think it starts, we have to go back to our education system, and we've lost so much ground there. And at this point, we've got people that are in our legislature today that don't know anything about the Constitution. Our civics is not being taught. Our history is being thrown out of whack. And people are, the education system has failed us.
I agree with that.
Well, when you have administrators increasing in numbers faster than the students, and that you're losing students, there's a problem in this country with top-heavy management.
Too many chiefs and not enough Indians.
That's it right there.
I noticed that. I used to be in higher education. I was a instructor, professor, and the institution I worked for kept adding administrators, and it was getting top heavy with administration. And I know that's happening in K through 12.
It is.
Because I read a lot about it, and I've seen some of the statistics about there's more administrators in some school districts than there are teachers. And what sense does that make, So, okay, very good thoughts. Dale Tipton, you get the last word on this one.
Well, I'm just kind of thinking that, we've talked about a lot of things here this evening and a lot of different ideas. And so I just kind of let my mind wander to that day when that convention would be called. And you can imagine, 50 states sending commissioners to this convention to come up with amendments and then to openly debate them. And you think about every television studio around the nation and probably around the world is going to be tuning in to listen to this national debate on all these topics. And regardless of what came out of the convention, just the debate has to be great for the country.
Yep, I agree. Well, I want to thank each member of the Roundtable panel for your input tonight. It's been invigorating and interesting. Now we're going to take a short break and see a video from some young people answering the question, is the federal government broken?
Our government is definitely broken.
The EPA is totally out of control.
VA is completely broken.
If a private business were to run things like the government, they would be out of business like that.
Our tax system is ridiculous.
And how are we supposed to pay for that and our student loans and find a place to live with no job? I mean, it's almost as if nobody really cares what happens to us anymore.
There are so many problems that we have, and that's just going to be placed on us.
My generation especially, we need to lead, because enough is enough. DC needs to listen, and we need to take the power back to the people.
And that leaves me and our state director, Dale Tipton. Dale, tell the audience about our Step Up program, how they can help.
Well, we just got it popped up on the screen there. So, in in Convention of States, we're all about getting active, right, and discovering what it's like to be a true citizen activist, instead of people that that sit and watch TV and talk with our neighbors about what great problems we're experiencing. We're urging people to get out and to get busy, get engaged, get involved with their community. And this especially applies, I think, to many of our younger people who's just like the folks in the video we're talking about. They see the things that are going wrong and maybe they don't know exactly what to do. And so here we're offering this what we call our step up program, which is just basically it's a recruitment effort to get people involved in conventions of states and the various forms of leadership that are available to us. And so if we go ahead and click on that link, it will take us to another page. And then if you could just scroll down there a little bit, we offer some choices in some various categories. Can you scroll down there a little bit, Dale? I don't know if he has the opportunity to do that, but anyway, there are positions that are open for if you're a leader type of a person. There's things that you can do. You can take the position that I just assumed, for example, as a spot where you can serve as a leader, where you're trying to formulate plans and try to do things to make things better. There's places that you can you can get involved at other levels, whether it's there we go. We show the different things. This is under leadership opportunities. Or there's people that are involved with computers. There are people involved with communications, all kinds of other things that make the organization work. That it takes people that are decision makers and they're used to doing those kind of things to make it happen. Under simple volunteering opportunities, maybe you want to serve, but you don't. You just don't want the full responsibility of being a leader. And once again, there's things there that a person can do. Posting things on social media. You can work with your legislative liaison team. We even have groups of people that do nothing more than pray for other people who are in need, who are having some kind of financial or family health type of hardship. There are a world of places to serve just as a volunteer, working an information table, passing out literature, talking to your friends, block walking to establish relationships face to face within your community, to tell them about Convention of States, all kinds of things like that. And then we go on from there to community involvement. When is the last time you went to a school board meeting? Do you know what your normal school boards are talking about? Are there things going on there of concern to you as a parent or a grandparent? Same thing with city and state council meetings, county commissioners, etc. There are all kinds of things. We as taxpayers are throwing a lot of money out there to all of these different organizations, and we elect people to properly spend that money and to do things that better our communities. And are those things really happening? And do we as citizens know? And so this is a way to get everybody involved at whatever level you would like, from an hour or two a week or month to much, much more, depending upon what kind of time availability and commitment you have. We have something, John, for everybody that wants to get involved with us.
That sounds good. Thanks, Dale. And I hope people will take advantage of your phone number or your email address and get in touch with you to find ways that they can help us bring this thing to fruition. Well, friends, that brings us to the end of this month's Roundtable. Before I say goodbye, I want to give you our email address. If you have any questions about Convention of States, you can email them to us at that address on your screen, raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. That's raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. Now, I want to invite you to be sure to tune in next Monday, May the 1st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for our weekly COS Indiana Live, when our guest will be David Nolly, a brand new district captain in Indiana. That's next Monday night. And our next roundtable will be on the 4th Monday of May. That'll be May the 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. May 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern. And now to close us out, here's a message from our national COS president, Mark Meckler, called "The Day I'll Quit Fighting."
Empathize with people who would give up. It doesn't make sense to me. Sam Adams said, for those of you who prefer safety and security over liberty, over the animating fight for liberty, I hope that you enjoy licking the hands that feed you. May your chains rest lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you are our countrymen. Like, do you understand that your kids and you are sentencing your kids and your grandkids and your friends' kids and your neighbors' kids to a lifetime of slavery and servitude, literally, of fear, of living in the darkness, but never, ever, never, never, never give up. George Washington lost the majority of his battles that he fought in the American Revolution. If you read his writings, if you read the letters where he was writing to Congress asking for money and troops, he was saying, we're losing. I don't have the troops I need. I don't have the supplies I need. Did he quit? What about the guys on the beach at Normandy? Like, what did they do? Did they just quit? Oh, there's, a lot of guys are dying around me. It's really bad. It looks really dismal. Those cliffs are huge. Machine gun fire raining down on us. And it's too hard. We should just quit. Thank God those people didn't quit. If they had, where would we be? I get discouraged for sure. And I will quit fighting at some point. And that point is when the first shovel of dirt hits the top of my box 6 feet down.